The Prophet Jonah. The name from Nineveh. Nineveh is a city in Mosul. The Assyrians made it their capital city. Jonah, who was born in Nineveh, was sent as a prophet to the people there. He was 30 years old when he became the prophet. The prophet Jonah is famous for his name Ibn Matta, Matta's son. According to a rumour, Matta was the name of Jonah's father or mother. He is mentioned as Zayn and Sahibi Hud in the Quran because he was swallowed by a fish. Both names mean owner of fish. Nineveh was the most wealthy and biggest city in the West States during Jonah's time. More than 100,000 people lived there. The people were evil and corrupted because of the city's great wealth. The people of Nineveh worshipped the idols instead of Allah. The prophet Jonah leaves his people. After he became a prophet, the prophet Jonah spent 33 years trying to make the people become believers. But the people of Nineveh didn't take him seriously, and they continued to do wrong things. After 33 years, only 2 people believed in the prophet Jonah, and the others kept denying him. The prophet Jonah lost hope in the people. The prophet Jonah was very upset that he couldn't get his people to listen to him. One day he decided to leave Nineveh. While he was leaving the city, he told the people that Allah's punishment would soon follow and they would face a disaster. The prophet Jonah had made this decision without consulting Allah and left the city without his permission. But he was Allah's holy messenger who had to follow his orders. He wasn't allowed to leave somewhere without Allah's permission. Actually, this departure was not an escape from Allah or a denial of this duty. It was only something that was done out of anger towards the people. Even so, it was considered a mistake for a prophet to behave in such a way. The fish's food. The prophet Jonah went to the seashore after he left Nineveh and boarded a ship to go on his journey. The ship sailed away from the shore with the prophet Jonah on it. After a while it stopped. It couldn't go forward or back. They tried everything to make it move, but it wouldn't. The crew didn't know what to do because they were stuck in the middle of the sea. Not only that, a storm that had suddenly started was going to make the ship sink. Everyone was afraid and started panicking. Thinking that it was bad luck, they said, "There is probably a sinner amongst us. The ship won't go anywhere unless he leaves." But how would they find the sinner amongst them? Many different suggestions were made, and in the end they decided to draw lots. Whoever would lose would be thrown from the ship into the sea. The lots were drawn, and the prophet Jonah was the one to be picked out. The passengers were shocked because he had introduced himself to them when he got on the ship. The passengers talked among themselves. "He's a nice and pure person. He can't be a sinner. It was probably just a coincidence." They drew lots for the second time, and the prophet Jonah was picked once again. The prophet Jonah had realized his mistake, and while he was taking his clothes off to jump into the sea, some of the passengers tried to stop him. The lots were drawn for the third time, and when he was picked again, it was clear that the prophet Jonah had to leave the ship. It was midnight when the prophet Jonah was about to jump off the ship. There were huge waves from the storm. After jumping into the sea and struggling with the huge waves for a while, he was eaten by a great fish. The prophet Jonah thought for a moment that his end had come when he was swallowed. However, when he was in the fish's stomach and realized that he was still alive, he immediately took refuge in Allah. The prophet Jonah had recited Allah's name throughout his whole life. He had started reciting even more since being swallowed by a fish because all the material reasons for his survival were now gone. The night, sea and the fish had turned against him. Only a power that could control these could save him. The prophet Jonah realized there was nothing else to do but to take refuge in Allah. He admitted his mistake. "Dear Allah, there is no other God but you. I will keep away from me the idea of not having you in my life." The prophet Jonah's genuine repentance was accepted, and Allah ordered the fish to go to the shore and throw out the prophet Jonah. The fish that was carrying the prophet Jonah did as it was told. The prophet Jonah had fallen weak and ill. He had to be taken care of. He felt like he was a newborn. Allah made a tree called a yarkan grow on the shore to protect Jonah from the sun. He rested there for a while and gathered his strength after eating the tree's fruits. The tribe that was saved from being destroyed. Sometime after the prophet Jonah had left his tribe, the signs of disaster that he had given them had started to show. Dark clouds and smoke had covered the entire sky, and a terrible sound that came from the howling of the wind could be heard. The people now believed that what the prophet Jonah had said was true. They thought that they had made a big mistake by not listening to his advice. They felt very guilty and started searching for the prophet Jonah. They wanted to believe in him as soon as they could so that they could save themselves from this disaster. But they couldn't find him. They became even more frightened and worried. Men, women and children gathered together, took their animals with them and left the city. They gathered in a square and started crying and begging Allah for help. Everyone said their goodbyes to each other. Allah accepted Jonah's people's sincere and genuine repentance and kept the disaster away from them. It is said that Jonah's people prayed like this when they saw the disaster. Dear Allah, we have committed a great sin, but you are great and merciful. Do what is expected of you and not what is expected of us. The prayer was made on a Friday and on the 10th day of Muharram, the first month of the Islamic calendar. They are the only tribe in history to have reached salvation from a disaster because of their repentance. The Prophet Jonah returns to his tribe. The Prophet Jonah had returned to health after recovering for some time under the yucca tree. He then went back to his tribe in Nineveh. When he arrived in Nineveh, he saw that his people were waiting for him. Everyone had repented and was now ready to listen to the Prophet Jonah's orders. The Prophet Jonah was very happy to see them in this way, and once again began his duty to enlighten his people. The people of Nineveh obeyed the Prophet Jonah for as long as he lived. They acted in accordance with the laws and orders of Allah. After the Prophet Jonah passed away, the people began to stray from their religion and go back to their old ways. Allah then let the enemy attack the city, and the government of Assyria was destroyed in this way. The miracle that was lived once again. There are very important lessons to be learned from the Prophet Jonah's life. It is considered as an unbelievable event for deniers that a man could stay alive after being swallowed by a fish. However, there is a close example to this that happened in 1891 near the Falkland Islands. The incident took place on a whaling ship. The ship was returning full, and on their way back, the crew saw an enormously big whale. The crew wanted to hunt it down. However, when they got close enough to see the seagulls on the whale, one of the crew, James Bartley, fell into the sea. The entire search was in vain, and there was no hope left of finding him alive. The whale hunt lasted for hours. The crew started opening up the belly of the whale and saw something very big in it. It could be whale fat, which would make all the crew very rich as they could sell it. The excitement increased as the belly opened up. Then one of the sailors shouted. The large thing that they saw was James Bartley. Bartley was still alive even though he was covered with the stomach liquids of the whale. Bartley came around 2 days later with the help of medication. Everyone was making jokes about the things that the crew said because they didn't think it was true. But when the doctors checked Bartley, they found the liquids of the whale. After that event, Bartley became famous for having the most adventurous sea accident. Kate Smith, an American writer, wrote about the accident and the whole world heard about it. James Bartley had remained in the whale's stomach for nearly a day. Sources suggest that the Prophet Jonah had remained in the large fish for the same amount of time. Information on the subject is given in the work Nuzul Sebeple, Surah Safat, 144th verse. There are many views about how much time the Prophet Jonah remained in the fish's stomach. It varies from 3 to 40 days. When he was swallowed, it was dawn, and he was thrown out at night. Only Allah knows the truth. The last idea is the most sensible one. Whales are enormous in size. For instance, an adult whale is nearly 13 meters long and weighs 40 tons. Just the liver of such an animal weighs half a ton, and the weight of its heart is about 150 kilos. Such a whale can eat up to 1 ton of food. A human is not even 1/10 of this amount. It is said that there are some whales that can reach up to 25 metres and weigh more than 100 tonnes. Captain Jacques Cousteau researched into the fish that swallowed the Prophet Jonah and found surprising results. The results were then published as The Fish That Swallowed the Prophet Jonah. According to the research, it is not hard for a human being to be swallowed by a sea bass. The reason is that these fish have a very strange mouth and stomach structure and can even swallow fish their own size. For the Prophet Jonah to be swallowed by a fish and get out of there alive shows the greatness of Allah. Allah, who makes babies remain in their mother's tummies for 9 months and after protecting and feeding them, makes them come out at the right time. Also has the power to send the Prophet Jonah into a fish's belly and keep him alive just so that he can learn a lesson.